everyone, and welcome to another session of our DCI and cloud stream. So today we have our co-host and speaker, and now becoming like a partner, Zsiga. It's our third session, Zig. I believe it's very exciting and informative sessions, and thank you for being with us and allocating the time and experience, knowledge to share with everyone. Today we have a very exciting title. I believe when we were thinking about it, I said, why not to make it like a bit catchy? Learn how to architect cutting edge data center. Do you want to comment or
Yeah,
welcome everyone?
yeah, I'll comment a couple things, right? So
Yeah.
it's a pleasure, Mohammed. I actually think we're having more fun than everyone else on these webinars. I think we're having a ball putting the content together, going back and forth, and then actually, hosting the webinar. So I think we've been having a really good experience. And honestly, for the attendees, we've had some really great interactions over the last couple months. So I'm hoping today we can keep that going, right? It's all about interactions. It's all about helping you guys, right? It's not about helping Mohammed and I. Like we kind of know this technology. We've done this stuff, right, from a design perspective, but we're really here to help you. Um, the title, right? Learn how to architect cutting edge data centers. It's a little catchy, but that's really what we're trying to do for you, right? We're really trying to make your data centers cutting edge. So I think the content that we're going to cover today is really going to hit that mark.
100% agree. Yeah, and as we mentioned, try to make it as interactive as possible. And as we said, we are trying to lay the foundation layer by layer. So we talked about data center, how to data center interconnect last session. Today we'll talk about the new trend. Next session we'll start talking about how to start thinking about private cloud, public cloud, how to interconnect your data center with the hyperscaler and public cloud like AWS, Microsoft, and so on. So, and we'll keep growing from there. Just to kick it directly, Zig, if we go to the agenda.
We'll do, we'll do. So we're gonna hit
Awesome.
the agenda real quick, right? But I just want to make sure, like Mohammed said, and we've said it a couple times, interactivity, right? We need this to be interactive. That's how we're all gonna get value out of this today. So if you have questions, please unmute yourself. Feel free to ask any question. No question is a question. We're here to help you. So ask your questions, give us your design situation, and we'll help you every step of the way. If for some reason you can't ask the question on the audio, feel free to put it in chat and we will read it and we'll kind of go over it on the webinar.
100%. Yeah, so the agenda will, as I was discussing with Zig, we'll try to give you more like an architect and designer, what to consider and why you need to go for this cutting edge data center. And don't let the catchy title mislead you. We don't build a cutting edge data center just to be like leading edge or like being the pioneers. We need to link it to a business case. So we need to use technology for the business benefit or for the customer benefit. I believe you agree, Zig. That's why I like the when you start thinking about the agenda, you started why, and then the business use cases before talking about technology.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head there, Mohammed, right? So I think I'm going to go on a soapbox as always, right? I'm going to do my own thing here. And I think as an industry, we don't learn about why we do things early enough. We're told to do certain designs and certain implementations, and it's really, a technology specific implementation, and we don't know why we're doing it. Um, and if you are in that same boat, you can resonate with that a little bit, I think. Now, for me, my mindset shifted, right? When I went over and took the CCDE, the Cisco Certified Design Expert certification, and more importantly, that whole journey that I went through personally, my mindset shifted from doing technical design, like best practice and designing a solution because I felt like it was the best, to more about why, right? Why are we doing these things? Um, and what is in it for the business, right? Because again, every design decision that we make has to tie to a business requirement or business constraint, business priority, and even a business use case. Every single design decision has to do that. So this is really dear to me, right? And we'll go to the next slide if that's cool with you, Mohammed. And as we design things, we have to ask why, right? And I'll even talk about preconceived notions for a minute. If you're not familiar with what a preconceived notion is, it's like an idea in your head that you apply because you like it, or because you have some event that happened in your experience that makes you like that technology or that design. I'll give you a quick specific example. I'm a big fan of EIGRP, right? So that IGP, that routing protocol. And I inherently want to use EIGRP everywhere. It's just a driver in my head. Now, it took me a long time to know, hey, I'm putting EIGRP here. It doesn't make sense. I need to use OSPF, or I need to use BGP. That's a preconceived notion. So we can't design something just because we like it. We have to design something that ties back to all the requirements of both business, technical, application requirements. All right, I'm off my soapbox now. I'm sorry, guys.
No, no, 100, really interesting, and really, I feel very excited and motivated when I listen to you, Zig. And just thinking, something came to my mind. Maybe while we are working, so while we are doing this today, we will discuss 8 new trends. So maybe we can open it like a game or like a competition. After we finish each technology, we'll ask the audience, what is the main business benefit and why do you think we can use this? So let's practice this today and see
I
how it
like
goes.
that. And just so that guys, everyone knows on the webinar, we didn't plan that, right? So that is just a new thing we're going to do for the webinar. And I think it's a great idea, right? We'll ask you guys what you guys think for each of these technologies we covered today.
Yeah, great. So let's jump in to
All
the
right.
first slide.
So we talked about why, right? For a little bit. I went on my soapbox, right? So I'm going to ask you all, why do we need a data center architecture? No. So I'm going to let you guys answer. Again, feel free to unmute yourselves. Feel free to answer in chat. But why do we need a data center architecture? I warned you it's going to be interactive. I warned you.
Yeah.
Well, if no one else has an idea, I'll ask Mohamed, right? So, Mohamed, why do we need a data center architecture? Why, in your opinion, in your perspective, do we need a data center architecture?
Yeah, yeah. As we mentioned, because the architecture and architect is like, for me, like a bridge. He's the one trying to translate the business requirement into a technical blueprint or a roadmap. So imagine yourself trying to build your house without a blueprint, without an architect. It for sure it will fail, or you will discover something after you start. Oh, I need 4 bedrooms. I actually built 2, so you will destroy everything you did and start again. I'm just finished building my house, so that it was a dilemma. So you need to plan first. And for us as a network and technical engineers, we need to first think about business requirement, business problem we are trying to solve, or even if there's no problem for the best and world or euphoria, we need to provide more benefits or make the business thrive and grow. So this is for me the main reason to go for architect. If anybody else has, I believe Tony, he put something on the chat. So
We got a few things in chat. So we got I'm not going to pronounce your name right. I'm sorry. Tesos, I think maybe, because we need to build a DC. And then we got Sarav for planning and feature scaling according to application needs. I like that. This applications, right? So the purpose of a data center is really to host something, applications, services, and those applications or services are really tied to a business problem or a business requirement, right? It could be an application that's for your users, your customers. It could be your own application for your IT teams or your network teams. It could be because you're trying to make money as a business, right? And on this slide here, it all comes down to the business problems that we're trying to solve, right? Again, we're always going to tie it back to the business. So why are we building a DC architecture? Because we're solving a business problem, right? And we're going to cover a few of those business problems on the next slide. Can anyone give me an idea what a business problem that we'd be trying to solve with a data center? We got some more chats, so I'm just going to read some of these off if you guys don't mind. So Shanar said to help customers meet their business goals, serve workload, storage, applications, internal, external. That is perfect. Right on. Rafi said, need to know current IT state, IT constraints, future state, and set up the baseline. Was someone going to talk? I'll let you guys talk. Go ahead. No? Okay. We got a few more comments, and then I'm going to go on to the next question here. We have 2 questions. So Dhruv said latency and cost. Rajath said scalability, reliability. Sita said to deliver enterprise applications, and Osama said CapEx, OpEx. Those are all great business problems, right? We're going to cover a few of those in a minute. So I always put this question on this slide, right? And I harped on why. But as designers, as architects, whatever word you resonate for, right? Designers and architects can be kind of synonyms, if you will. If you're a designer, you should be asking why. And it's not always a technical why. It's a why to the business, right? I'll give you a quick example of what I mean. Application teams usually say, or applications development teams, coders, right? Programmers, they usually say they need layer 2 connectivity between their servers. I ask why. Why do you need layer 2 connectivity between your servers? Or a better one, I get the same application teams and say, I need a hard-coded IP address in my application. And I say, why? Why do you need to do these things? These are bad decisions, right? I'm not a fan of layer 2 connectivity if we don't need it. I prefer not to do layer 2 connectivity. And there's no valid reason to hard-code an IP address in an application, right? So we have to push back. As architects, as designers, we have to push back. Mohamed, anything else to add on that before?
No, 100%. I really enjoyed and liked most of the comment, all the comments here about the reasoning. Also something important. So we know that network is changing, IT completely changing a lot. And every company, the IT is becoming one of the major arms of the company to grow and to get more customers. So we need also to consider that some of the business owners, application owners, and even the marketing team, they were a bit suffering in order to deploy a new application. It took them maybe few months, if not a year or so. So also one of the key requirements for these new trends is what we call it to enhance and improve time to market. If I have an idea and I want to build it, I don't want the network team to tell me I need 1 month to lay the switch, 2 weeks to configure the VLANs, and so on. If we try to achieve better time to market through simple first, try to make the architecture simple, programmable, real-time visibility, all these also are a key business factors to build a cutting-edge data center to help the business achieve their goals. Back to you, Zig.
Yeah, that's right on, Mohamed. Thanks, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I will also comment, I think that the chat interaction's been great. Guys, keep it up. This is outstanding, right? Again, if you feel comfortable on unmuting yourselves and talking on the webinar, feel free to do so. We don't lock the mute button, right? So that's all on you guys to unmute yourself and mute yourself when you're done talking. We don't govern that, right? So I'm gonna keep going. I can talk. I'm very winded at times. So let's talk about those business problems, right? And we have 8 here. This is not an all-inclusive list, mind you, right? And as you go through and design solutions and talk to customers and talk to your organizations, you're going to realize that sometimes your business use cases could be very specific to your business or your company, right? Or your customer. So these are just some quick high-level ones that we put on there. Service application hosting, which we already talked about, right? Most data centers have some sort of service or application that they're hosting for consumption. Now that consumption can be internal consumption only, like I'm thinking like a collaboration service like VoIP, right? Some sort of VoIP service, or some sort of IM chat service, or some sort of video teleconference VTC service, right? Those are traditionally going to be for internal consumption. Could be for external consumption as well. Something that would be specifically external client facing could be like a custom client web app, right? Some sort of web tier app, like a 3-tier application with web application and database. That would be something that could be externally consumable. The next one's consistent user experience, right? We want to provide, I call it quality of experience. So it's a different terminology. Quality of experience, please don't get confused with quality of service. Quality of experience is everything to the user and the application, right? So it could be QoS, but it's also security. It's also compliance. It's also application-aware routing. It's a whole bunch of other factors that goes into quality of experience. Mohamed, do you have anything you want to add to those two before I keep going?
No, I agree with you 100%. Yeah.
Just checking the chat real quick. Okay, so rapid and agile service creation. So Mohamed kind of touched base on this earlier, right? A lot of companies today need that rapid offering, right? They need to be able to instantiate something new on the fly where they don't have to wait weeks and weeks or months for the network team to do something. I've actually been in companies like that in the past where the development team will put a request in and the network team takes like weeks to complete the request. And the request is build out a new network, a new subnet. The request is build out a new VM or 5 new VMs, right? And it takes weeks to do in some cases. This type of data center architecture that we're talking about, you go down from weeks to minutes, right? Like, and it's automated, right? Mohamed, you wanted to say something?
No, I was going to mention that even we built a couple of data centers that connected to the multi-tenancy, that you have multiple customers, and each customer, when logging, he will find his own resources, like resource pool, where he can create a VM, attach it to a firewall, publish it to the internet, like drawing, and then click submit. It will be up and running in seconds, not even minutes. So this is the beauty about programmability, about controllers, about self-service. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a different world. I mean, and
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of you have experience with this, right? This isn't necessarily a new trend. This has been going on for the last 5 to 10 years now. The new trends are the technologies that solve this, right? But the need, this business need, right? This use case, it's not necessarily a new trend. The fourth one on the left side here is business continuity. So obviously, keeping your business functioning, keeping things up and running, redundancy, like a disaster recovery site, or active data centers, or active standby data centers, right? That's kind of self-explanatory. The next one, multi-tenancy on the right, and segmentation. I mean, that's huge, right? From a use case perspective. Depending on where you are and who you're provisioning services for, applications and services and whatnot, you could very well need a multi-tenant environment. Can someone tell me today what they use for a multi-tenant environment? I'll ask that question. Feel free to answer it in chat or unmute yourself. We got managed hosting, Colo. Thank you guys. So Shanar said managed hosting. Zsiga said Colo. Those are great examples, right? Managed hosting. So if you think of the website, like I have a website, right? My own personal website, and it's hosted, and they're hosting it, and they're keeping things kind of either containerized or multi-tenancy, right? Depending on how they're doing it on the back end. What else we got?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Zig. Let's say you are working in a enterprise or a big company. Let's say it's a food company, and they are having their own data center where they are running their own application, and all the external users are their own employees. You don't have other user other than their own employees. Do you find a need for such a company to have and adopt multi-tenancy?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We'll start there, right? And hopefully some of you have that, in your environments. I do see some value with that, and I do see a solution So I think it would depend on the department and the company and any type of segregation that they would need. So I could see an example of like you could do production, like production's one tenant, but then you could
Yeah.
development is another tenant, QA could be another tenant, right? And that's actually something I've done in real life in the wild situation for a company I worked for years ago. They had a SaaS application, so a service application that their clients consumed, right? Their customers consumed. So they had a production instance of it, but then they had a development instance of it, and they had a QA instance of it, and they actually had a staging instance as well. So they had 4 different multi-tenant environments, and the controls were very similar between all 4. And this was about 7, 8 years ago. So they didn't have, the software-defined data center solutions that they have now, right? So it was all manual. It was a pain in the butt. That's a great question, Mohamed. Thanks, man.
Yeah, and maybe while we are discussing, we talk about why we need multi-tenancy and how, but also we can talk about to which level or which layer. For example, are you doing multi-tenancy physically? As Zik mentioned, 10 years ago, people used to have a dedicated maybe rack or dedicated
Physical rack.
location. Now with virtualization, with automation, you can have multi-tenancy up to the inside the server, multiple firewall context, VRFs, as Mohammed mentioned, MPLS VPN, and take it over all the way to the cloud. So now we have the flexibility to build our own multi-tenancy solution from the server to the end user, and we'll talk about it. Next, if I may help you, Zig, I believe visibility and assurance is also a really important business case. As I mentioned, for top management to decide and put the right decision, they need more visibility. So they need the right information to make the right decision. So that's why now visibility and assurance is becoming very critical. And I am sure all of you heard about BI, business intelligence, big data, how using the application, and also some analytics, they trying to get data from the application, combine it with some logs from the network, with logs from security, and then you can do some analytics and trends, and then can give big picture to the top management to help them to decide. So I believe this is also another very important use case for the new trends of data center. And Zig, if you want to add something here.
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about like nowadays, right? Visibility and assurance. I mean, I don't know if everyone's heard about zero trust architecture yet. If you haven't, I would definitely look into it. I have content out there if you want to look at it. I'm not trying to make a plug here by no means. If you don't know what zero trust architecture is, you need to look into it for sure. You need to know what it entails. Part of it is visibility. It's visibility of everything, right? It's not just visibility of users, it's visibility of every resource and what that resource is doing or shouldn't be doing live and real time. So visibility is key here. What is your applications doing, right? And not just for the business, but like I have customers, and I can't name names obviously, right? But I have customers today that have no visibility of their applications, right? Like they know they have 10,000 applications or 1,000 applications, but they don't even know what their applications are doing. That's huge, right? That's a huge limitation. And some of the solutions we're going to talk about today provide that visibility. They start to kind of unpack what an application is doing, what those workflows within the application is doing. And then from a business perspective, you can say, well, that application is not supposed to be doing that, right? That application isn't supposed to be sending data to the cloud, or that application is not supposed to be talking to that other application. What's going on? I mean, it's actually a pretty big threat vector. So if you're a security person, right, applications and the visibility and assurance within the application, that's a huge threat vector these days. Malicious people compromise applications, but because we don't have visibility of what that application is supposed to be doing, it goes unnoticed.
100%.
So we got the next one, self-provisioning and self-healing. So anyone have any kind of use case around that or any driver behind self-provisioning and self-healing? There's a chat in here. Shanar says observability is the new term picking up. I like that term. I haven't heard that yet, honestly. So observability, that's awesome. We'll have to use that.
Yeah, thank you for noticing that. Yeah. Regarding self-provision and self-healing, we talk a bit about how the end user, if you are, example, consider the data center like a private cloud, if you have your own private cloud, or even if you are working in a public cloud and your people can consume your service like Amazon or AWS and Azure and Google, they can just log in and create services on the fly automatically. Self-healing, we can touch base on it, like concept of containers when you have like Kubernetes, and monitor the health of the one container. If it's failed, it will just re-establish a new one with the same specs. So this was like a dream coming true. So self-healing, I believe, maybe it's not 100% yet, but we are approaching day and day to this big dream.
Yeah, so I would go even another example of self-healing, like most of the software-defined data center solutions out there, and I would even say software-defined networking solutions, not just data center. So we'll go like a level higher than that, right? They're going to have some functionality of self-healing. They may not have the full end all of fixing something yet, but they're going to be able to report on issues, right? And it can be something as simple as, hey, the optic isn't working on this device. And you might have to physically go do something, but reporting on it is a big benefit that we don't see now. We don't see, let me phrase that, we didn't see years ago, right? We had no idea that something was down unless we got a call from a user saying, hey, I can't connect the internet. So self-healing and self-reporting, those are huge items. The business benefit here, so that's a business use case, but the business benefit is a troop multiplier. So I don't know if you've ever heard what a troop multiplier is. So the way I use that terminology is that any benefit, any use case that can provide my networking team, my IT teams, more time to do other things, right? So if they're not troubleshooting a problem, if they're not instantiating a service, if they're able to do some other business initiatives, that is a true multiplier. Now I'm getting them to do something else when before they were troubleshooting that issue or they were deploying that service. So that, a lot of these kind of fill in that bucket of true multiplier.
Yeah.
And then the last one, we have orchestration automation, right? So I think that is honestly these days pretty self-explanatory. But if we can orchestrate the workflows that we have, the business workflows, if we can automate the tasks we have, right? I did a study a couple weeks ago on automation and the magnitude of completing a task, right? So if you have to go and change a setting on 100 switches manually, how long does that take? Right? Going and logging into every switch, changing that setting. It could be something really small, but changing that setting is going to take time, right? So you go to the 100 switches. Well, if you have a system that can automate that for you, how fast is that, right? And then you scale that out. You go 100 switches, 1,000 switches, 10,000 switches, and it's exponentially a magnitude difference of time it takes to do something. But I'm sure everyone knows automation and orchestration, so I don't need to harp on it. Do we have any questions on this slide before we move on?
Anybody has other business use cases for new data center before we move on? As we said, this is not a complete list. This is just a few examples. But yeah, if you feel that you have another business use case you want to add before moving to them.
Yeah. All right. Feel free to chime in, and we can come back to this slide too. So I'm going to head up to the next slide here, right? So we're going to talk about our DC new trends. Oh, we got someone said survivability. That's a good one. Thanks, Osama. I like that.
Yeah.
I could see that from an application standpoint and a data center standpoint, right? We care about that application being available, survivable, no matter what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
DC new trends. So here's what we're going to cover today. Again, this is also the same thing. It's not an all-inclusive list. This is probably the top buckets, if you will, that are out there today that we should talk about. And we have a slide dedicated to each one of these. So I'm not going to go through the list here. We'll go each slide. And we'll do what Mohamed said here too. We'll Well, what's the reason behind doing these? What's the design reason? What's the business use case, business driver, the impact, etc. Right? Again, like I said, this is an all-inclusive list. If you guys have something else that you're doing, let us know. And we want to talk about what you guys are doing, right? So the first one we have here is spine leaf. Anyone running a spine leaf architecture? I know a couple of you are moving to it from our initial conversation before we started. Anyone want to say that they're running a spine leaf architecture, and if so, why? It's an open-ended question, right? So I'm sorry, I'm good at those.
Yeah.
We got redundancy in the chat. We got non-blocking, ease of automation, easy
East-west
traffic.
Yeah, it's a good one.
That is a huge one right there. Easy
exactly.
east-west traffic. We got scalability.
Yeah.
Easy to scale out. These are all great, guys. Seriously, this is outstanding. So a couple things I'll talk about, and then Mohamed, feel free to chime in, right? Since I'm already talking, I'll just keep going here. So spine leaf, we got another one, horizontal scalability. That's a great. Spine leaf is a very different architecture than the legacy kind of aggregation and distribution and whatnot, right? And even the data center space, it wasn't as efficient. So spine leaf adds bandwidth, right? It's very predictable, like Alu said. That's great. It's very predictable. There's no single points of failure from an architecture perspective. Everything has redundancy, right? And traditionally, they're done in pods of 2 at least, or 4. So the diagram may not show it 100%, but we got usually there's 2 spines. Usually there's 2 leaves in a pod or 4 leaves in a pod. And that way, those devices that are connected to those leaves are dual home to each leaf, right? And some sort of port channel or configuration, other technology that's out there. So it's not like there's a single point of failure even to your device. There could be a single point of failure to the application, but the application can move from host to host, right? That's the idea. Another thing here in this architecture, it's fast routing, right? The whole point is to get traffic from your leaf to your spine and gone, right? Fast ECMP, like Merrick said, routing. We're trying to get outbound. From a underlay perspective, there's layer 2, right? So it's not running. We're not running spanning tree in the underlay. We're not blocking any of these links. All these links are leveraged. In the overlay, depending on what you're running, you can run stretched layer 2 connectivity. Go ahead, Mohamed. I'm good. Sorry.
Yeah, I really liked all the comments. Actually, it's coming from business perspective, like non-blocking, scalability, serviceability, and so on. I just want to put shed here some lights. Why we draw it like this? Most people, when they draw spine and leaf, so the leaves on the top may be the same leaves at the bottom. But I just want to also discuss with you what's something that really becoming part of the discussion lately, what we call it 3-stage Clos and 5-stage Clos. So when we started, most of the people said we don't need to use a 3-tier, we need to concentrate, minimize number of devices, assure number of connectivity, flexibility. So we have this 3-stage. But also you may find when it's become very scalable, let's consider hyperscaler like Facebook and Google, where they have thousands and thousands, tens and hundreds of thousands of hosts connected to this closed architecture. Maybe by then they will start thinking about 5-stage spine and leaf, where you'll have your leaf, you'll have spine, and then you'll have super spine. So it may make sense for some of the big players. And again, it's become like a business and requirement decision. You don't just follow Facebook and build your data center like with 5-stage just to be like cutting edge. It depends on number of hosts, your kind of application, latency, and so on. So in addition to the benefits and the architecture about the Clos, I just thought to give you this hint about the 3-stage Clos, if you hear this term, and versus the 5-stage Clos.
Yeah, that's great, Mohamed. Right. So spine leaf by a 3-tier spine leaf is pretty scalable, right? That's going to scale pretty high depending on the hardware leverage. And again, we're being vendor agnostic. We're not specifically calling out any vendor hardware here, right? But a spine leaf architecture, the whole point is it's scalable, right? But there is a threshold when you start getting to that Facebook or Google size of a company, you need to go to that super spine design, right? That's just another level of an architecture that provides the same benefits. It's just a different level of scalability and flexibility. There's some other comments here, right? Sarav says to maintain the subscription ratio. That's great. These are all great benefits for sure. I love the interaction, you guys. Keep it up. This is really meaning a lot for us too, this back and forth interaction. So anything else you want to talk about spine leaf? I mean, some other architectures we're going to talk about further on kind of rely on spine leaf.
Yeah, maybe I just need to add that currently spine leaf started in the data center. I built it myself maybe 8 years now or 7 years ago. And I believe now even the service providers and edge, people even start thinking instead of building this 3 tiers or building the star where everything is connected to a core, even some of the service providers start thinking adopting this spine and leaf on their edge, maybe close to the radio station, like an aggregation. So I believe it's becoming very useful for many industry. If we maybe can sum this up by our question, if you can just, we talk about many use cases and many benefits of the new trends. If you consider spine and leaf, from your point of view, what do you think the main benefit from business perspective, not from technical perspective, you will gain by start deploying spine and leaf architecture instead of the old layer 2, 3 tiers architecture, core distribution and access?
Give it a minute. Is that a question for me, Mohamed? I'm sure that was a question for everyone else, right?
For you and all the audience, but you may start.
Okay. So I think the one that Saurabh just said is right on, right? Failure domain is limited, right? Again, it's more of a pod architecture, right? Where you're doing layer 3 boundaries, kind of isolating that layer 3 and layer 2 traffic, and you're running an overlay on top of it, right? You could do some sort of flow overlay. We haven't gotten into that yet. But from an architecture standpoint, you're creating these failure domains, right? Yeah. So if something happens in one pod, it's not going to trickle to another pod or even to the spines, right? It's isolated. The old architectures didn't do that very well. And so when you had a failure, a layer 2 failure or a layer 3 failure, you felt that ripple across the data center. If you were spanning layer 2 between 2 data centers, like a spanning tree, you block a port, right, for creating loops, you lose the other link. Well, it takes time for spanning tree to reconverge, right? If someone plugs a hub in, well, now you just created a massive, broadcast storm and loop. So there's some huge benefits. So failure domain was great. Anyone else have anything else? So I will say the last thing we're harping on this. Again, it's the pod architecture, right? But traditionally, what I've seen is a pair of leaves are deployed for a specific purpose, right? So maybe you have a ton of leaf pairs or pods for your virtualization hosts, right? So if you're running VMware, for example, ES6i hosts, right, or some sort of blade chassis, you might have 10 pods of your leaves that are for your blades. But then you might also have a dedicated pod of your leaves for border connectivity to the internet or to another site, right? And so you still have a purpose for your pods. It's not like you're connecting everything to one pod. You could do that if you're small. I wouldn't go and create dedicated pods if you're a small organization. There's no reason to do that long term. But again, you want to isolate that shared fate. All right, so you want to kind of put things in places that make sense, if you will.
100%. And I mentioned before we start recording, one of our colleagues, he mentioned that they are deploying now the SD data center, spine and leaf, and also SD-WAN. So maybe as Zig mentioned, in such situation, maybe you can start thinking about dedicated leaves. We call it border leaf or WAN leaf for the connectivity, and also for your management and control. As example, the servers like the ACI as example, or your management, you can maybe create a dedicated pod for your management and control. So still need to consider architecture. Don't build it like a spaghetti. Everything is connected everywhere. Also, you need to consider still spinally, but you need to put your logic regarding what to connect where into each leaf. And I believe all of us know that you cannot connect endpoints directly to the spine. This is a bad design. This is not a Clos.
Yeah. So I just highlighted like a pod, right? This is how I would
Yeah.
create a pod, right? Here's a set of leaves, and they would be for a specific purpose, right? And you might have a whole identical purpose for multiple pods, but that's the benefit. In when we get to controllers in a minute, you can template the pod designs, right? So you can have a pod design for your virtualization hosting. You have a pod design for your WAN connectivity. You have a pod design for your internet connectivity or DMZ connectivity, etc. And I would recommend that for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Just
Maybe before we move to the next technology, I may add one really business benefit. If you start talking about your CFO or your management team, spine and leaf actually really fit into controlling your capex and opex. So they will gain the benefit directly because reducing number of devices, reducing number of cable, all your devices are working. So the utilization for your investment, the return on investment will be seen very quickly with the spine and leaf. So when you start talking with business people, spine and leaf will give you direct return on investment if you from capex and opex perspective. Yeah, back to you, Zig, for Vxlan.
Yeah, thank you. That was great, right? So building on spine and leaf, right? And we're going to kind of cover Vxlan here, right? So the architecture underlying topology is still the same, right? So that's why we spent a lot of time on spine leaf. So here we still have spines and we still have leaves. And as you can see here in the diagram, we have our border leaf too. Just a quick show that, if you're going to have some sort of connectivity to a transport or to the internet, you would do a kind of a dedicated leaf for that, a pair of devices, right?
Yeah.
But now we're talking about adding technology that's going to give you some additional benefits from a business perspective. So we have spine and leaf. We talked about the benefits from business for spine and leaf. Can anyone tell me or mention some benefits that Vxlan provides to the business? And we'll give it a minute. And so while people are either typing away here, I'm going to throw out a couple while we're waiting. So Vxlan, and we can talk about the protocol at a high level, right? We got one person, Osama, just said something. Workload migrations between data centers. That is perfect, right? So Vxlan is one of those technologies that we talk about where we can get mobility between data centers, layer 3 and layer 2 mobility, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a driver to maintain subnets or IP addresses for whatever reason, that application can move between your data center locations, right? We got Mohamed said scalability and segmentation. We got Shinar said layer 2 reachability from any to any, east to west. I like that. Hey, Shinar, could you just send that to everyone and not just privately to me if you don't mind? Like to show everyone the comments. But those are great, right? Those are perfect. So Vxlan is going to run on top of the architecture. It's going to allow some benefits. It's going to allow layer two mobility between the data centers for sure. That's number one. We got some more. We got pod-to-pod communication, east-west, vMotion. Zeshen says freedom. I think that's freedom, right? From fixed IP address allocation. Yeah. So no static needs to have IP addresses, right? These are all perfect examples. Hey, Mohamed, did you want to add anything? Sorry, catching off guard there.
No. I'm really excited what I'm hearing. So even when I start hearing about VXLAN, maybe as I mentioned, almost 18 years ago, it started like trying to fix the limitation of the current network. As I mentioned, number of VLANs is limited. You cannot extend layer 2 easily from one data center to another. So people start thinking about this overlay technology, which regardless of whatever underlay technology, what they need, the application people or infrastructure, they need IP reachability from data center 1 to data center 2. Then they will build their own VXLAN, and they don't need to come back to the network whenever as example, their VLAN is stuck or they need to add a new subnet. At that point, maybe they can do everything virtualized using the VXLAN. So it's solving a lot of limitation inherited with VLAN and limitation onto layer 2 extension between two data center, as Zishan mentioned, IP addressing assignment, because you have flexibility with IP mobility. Yeah, a lot. Like if I started, I will not finish.
It's going to keep going on and on and on, right? There's so much.
Yeah.
And this is why we see Vxlan so much these days, right?
Yeah.
Because of all the benefits it provides from a business perspective. Everyone is running Vxlan. Everyone's migrating to Vxlan and other flavors of Vxlan, right? And other components of it. The last comment I want to just highlight here was from, I think it's Jawad, industry standard, not vendor specific. That is perfect, right? So it's, again, it's a technology that's not a specific vendor technology, right? It is vendor neutral, vendor agnostic, and a lot of solutions out there today, a lot of vendor specific solutions use a VXLAN.
Yeah. I really also like Jawad example, because when we build this slide, we try to make it neutral. We could talk about something like OTV, which is a bit similar also when it's come to layer 2 extension, but VXLAN provide standard and provide more flexibility. And as you mentioned, maybe people now start thinking as a service provider, have AVPN as a service provider, then AVPN to VXLAN or to on whatever, to have end-to-end traffic steering, end-to-end path performance, and so on.
All right. So if there's not anything else on this one, we're going to move on to the next one. But feel free to ask questions if you have any. Again, I love the interaction that we're getting in chat. This is outstanding, you guys. This, I think, makes us have a great day. Like, we put a lot of content here together, and to get this interaction, this level of interaction is outstanding.
Yeah, great. But before moving, I believe we talked at the start of this slide about the business benefits about VXLAN. Anybody, after we spend around 10 minutes talking about VXLAN, want to add benefits which the business will see after deploying VXLAN? Just to
that's a great question.
Make it solid and stress this information into all our minds.
So while I'm waiting for those chat messages and whatnot, I'll say, like, one of the item that we didn't talk about here is the controller element, right? So if I can grab the pen here and not mess this up, that's what I seem to do these days. So we have these controllers, right? And again, we're being vendor agnostic. One of the other benefits here is you can run VXLAN without a controller, totally, right? You can run it, do it manually, make changes manually, right? But when you start instantiate a controller to do it for you, you get all those same capabilities and benefits that we talked about with on the business slide, the business use case slide. True multiplier, right? Also, you can leverage the controller to template everything out for you. I mean, there's so much benefit that you get with that. And again, that's vendor agnostically, right? Any of these controllers out there should do the same thing. They should provide those same capabilities. Let's see.
100%.
Shinar answered your question. Looks like connect any workload to any workload, so any to any.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, that's outstanding, Shinar. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you. I will close it with just also two business benefits just came to my mind. Scalability, as you can see, VXLAN solve a lot of the scalability problem with the tradition network solutions, the legacy one, and also support segmentation, or we're trying to make our solution modular or segmented. So regardless of the underlay, are we using our own dark fiber, are we using a service provider, are we using whatever technology to connect this data center, VXLAN on top of that, you have two different layers, two different segmentation, and you are trying to decouple these two problems. So yeah, back to you, Zig.
That's outstanding, yeah. All right. So the next one is BGP as IGP. So I'll ask this question while I talk, as always, right? So how many of you have ever tried to use BGP as an IGP? And if you didn't know you could do it, you can do it. So I'll throw that out there, right? There are some advancements or features added to BGP to allow you to leverage it as an IGP. You increase the convergence time. You make it so you don't necessarily need to do a static neighbor configuration. So you can do some sort of dynamic configuration, right? But yeah, so I'll ask that question if anyone's ever done this before, and I'll let that stay there for a minute.
While people responding to your question, Zig, I thought to play the devil advocate. So I'll tell you, I don't mean it, but somebody may say it. I will never use BGP as an IGP because it's slow. It's require a lot of configuration and it's complex. How would you answer me?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of touched a little bit on that. So you can actually tweak BGP to make it fast,
Exactly.
a lot faster than it is natively, and that's some of the enhancements they've added to BGP. And then also one of the other big kind of sticking points is that when you do a BGP neighborship, you have to statically define that neighborship with the the neighbor IP that you know. Whereas there's some new features within BGP where you can do like a dynamic range. So a subnet, if you know in your design that you're going to do 100 BGP neighborships for whatever reason, you can do them all in the same subnet range and do a dynamic statement there, and it will neighbor up if they can reach those devices. And you can configure it as multi-hop or whatever you need to. And the benefits, like why would you do this, right? Why would you even do BGP as an IGP? So you're going to get scalability, right, and control, right? IGP doesn't necessarily provide that level of control that BGP does. So think of all the policies you could implement with BGP, and why would you need a policy, right? If you have a massive scale sized data center, maybe you had tons and tons of pods, you had tons and tons of hosts, and you needed some identification of this is one data center, this is another data center, and you wanted to kind of give each data center its own ASN internally, and then route between them. You could create policies on all of that. And that's probably one of the biggest benefits with running BGP as an IGP is the policy level.
100%. I agree with you. Scalability, because BGP maybe is the only protocol which can scale up to millions of routes, and I don't think ISIS can bear it. It can. I'm a big fan of ISIS, but not to that level. And also, the most important point is control. You know, with BGP, we can control even with the non-technical parameters. We can decide, I just want to send it to this autonomous system, regardless of the metric or regardless of the for OSPF and ISIS, it would be difficult. You need maybe something like traffic engineering to achieve this level, but BGP, it's like a built-in. Yeah.
No, right on, right on. We got a few comments. I just want to quickly highlight them. Sarab said, looking at scalability, ECMP, unnumbered interface, that's great. And sorry if you can hear my dog. My dog's in the room as always. That's my partner in crime here. We got Jawad. Yes, I had customers using BGP as underlay with Clos architecture. It differs with the implementation of service providers. Also feature rich in terms of route policy. That's outstanding. See, that's hitting all the marks we talked about.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to move on to the next one unless there's something else we want to talk about here.
Yeah, same question. If I'm back like a devil advocate, Zig answered my question. That I believe I'm convinced that BGP is fast using BGP pick and next hop tracking and other things, and BGP with some new dynamic configuration can make it easy. But what do you think? The last one. How to convince, as example, from business perspective, that your current staff doesn't understand BGP. How to solve this one, and what other benefits you can give to the business, which will try to balance this problem with the much more benefits they will give. It's a bit complex question, or
so just so everyone knows, Mohamed and I didn't ask these questions ahead of time. We're not leading the witness here. He's asking these questions live. So I just want to restate as best as I can so I understand the question, Mohamed, right? And make sure everyone else does too. So if they want to answer it, they can. So it sounds like you want to ask here, what if the devices don't support BGP? Is that?
No, I mean, no. I believe, what about the complexity of BGP that most of the people, most of the colleagues working on data center, maybe they are expert in OSPF, AIGRP, and ISIS. So there will remain a challenge how to assure that your staff understand BGP. So if this is one of the drawbacks that the company need to invest to uplift your staff to use BGP, what additional benefits which can make it like compensate this extra effort you will pay for as a company?
No, okay, so now I understand the question. So that's always the
Yeah,
hard part, right, guys? So you got to make sure you understand the question being asked. So you see how I asked why without asking why, right? Like
yeah.
I returned it back to Mohammed on, what are we trying to ask here? So that's a great question, right? BGP is inherently more complex than an IGP. So
Yeah,
what's the selling point, right? And I would have to
exactly.
consider all the benefits, right? Do the benefits outweigh my staff learning BGP? Right now, I would have to assume, maybe incorrectly, right? I would have to assume that my staff has some level of BGP experience. Maybe not to the experience of running it as an IGP, but definitely as like an internet architecture, right? If I have designers on my team, they should know how to architect an internet connectivity design. So they should have some idea of BGP. They should know AS path prepending, how to use that. They should know local preference. And then obviously they should know the mechanics of BGP, right, at an underlying level, that basic understanding. So, and maybe that's a reach. So I'll ask you guys, right? How many of you know BGP from a basic level? How many of you use BGP today at a basic level? Feel free to answer in chat or chime in on the audio.
Yeah,
With that assumption that they have a basic understanding, I don't think the uplift is that hard to get BGP working as an IGP, right? I mean, it's a couple feature changes. It's not like you're not doing MPLS L3 VPNs, right? You're not doing MPLS L2 VPN. You're not doing carrier supporting carrier, inter AS solutions, right? Which are the things that are complicated, are highly complicated. You're making a couple different tweaks to the BGP configuration to make BGP an IGP, right? And that's without policy defined. And then you're adding policy, which I would assume everyone should know how to do policy from an internet architecture perspective. Did I answer your question, Mohammed?
yeah, it does, and I believe a couple of the comments here in the chat is very correct. So Mohammed mentioned if your team already using BGP as a transit, as you mentioned, Zig, I believe they need just a few tweaks to understand what other parameter they can use to make BGP a great IGP. Soraf mentioned, sorry if I mentioned pronounce your name incorrectly, traffic engineering, BGP policy, efficient use of BGP. These are really good drivers.
Mm-hmm.
There
I
was a
wasn't thinking
question
about
from,
traffic engineering. That's great. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
there was a
outstanding.
question. Yeah, great. There was a question from Chinar. Actually, I was going to comment if we are strongly recommend BGP to be the only protocol for internal IGP and transit. If I remember before the call, one of our colleagues told us that he currently have OSPF and BGP. So do you really recommend to use BGP for both transit, I mean facing the internet, and also as your IGP?
So for me personally, I have to have a justification why I'm going to run BGP as an IGP,
Yeah,
and honestly, that comes down to control in my eyes,
yeah,
right? What don't I get, right? If I run OSPF or EIGRP or RIP even, right, whatever protocol as an IGP, what am I not getting because I'm doing that? And that's really the control. In my eyes, and the scalability, the high level scalability, right? I mean, to the exponential factor.
yeah.
So if I have an extremely high scalable requirement and I need control or, right? I would use both those as individual requirements. If I need that level of control, that granular control, then I'd run BGP as an IGP.
And agree. And maybe and don't take our comments and go tomorrow to the network and remove OSPF and all of you deploy BGP. You have to plan it, as we mentioned. Always think about architecture. Even if you want to do some hands-on, maybe you can keep, as we mentioned, chip in the night. Keep your current IGP, OSPF, or EIGRP, or what, regardless. Keep it running. Start deploying BGP. Make it less preferred. Start playing with it. Make sure you are solid. Understand how the traffic is going, understand if the traffic flow is still as expected as per the OSPF, and then give it some time and start migrating to BGP as a IGP, but don't jump into the water without preparation.
Remember, we don't make decisions without a reason why, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and again, there's no easy button. I want to make that very clear. There's like running BGP as an IGP. That doesn't mean it's an easy button. These are all, I like the analogy. These are all tools in your toolbox, right? You have a design toolbox at your desk, right? And you have all these different tools in that toolbox. So when it comes to a design situation, these are all presented to you. You can leverage them, right? But you have to have a justification. You can't just say, well, this sounds cool, I'm going to go run BGP, right? As an IGP. No, you really do need a valid justification, right? And this is, I'm telling you, this has been the hardest part in my mindset, is having that valid justification, right? I want to run EIGRP, like I told you at the beginning. Like I want to run EIGRP everywhere and run away with that and just be fine. But that's not a reason why, right? Just because I like it. Another good example is just because you're studying for the CCIE doesn't mean your production environment is a CCIE lab, right? So those are good questions to ask. There's some additional comments that I want to highlight, right? Jawad says if they are already adopting Vxlan, they should know BGP, and that's a great point, right? So if they're already doing Vxlan, then they know BGP, so it shouldn't be a huge uplift. Also, Jawad said abstraction, isolation, and protocols at different layers also helps in clear troubleshooting. I love that, right?
Point, we talked about. Yeah.
I'm gonna go on another soapbox real quick, right? And I'll be quick, Mohamed. I'll try to keep quick to this. We are designers, right? That's the whole intent. We are designers. We're trying to be the best designer that there is, or a better network designer, whatever terminology you want to leverage, right? To become a good or better or the best designer, we have to know how to troubleshoot these protocols. Not that we have to know how to do it from a CCI perspective or a command line perspective, but we have to know the pitfalls that a protocol can go into from a design perspective, right? So keep that in mind, that if we don't know enough about a protocol to properly troubleshoot it or know where it could be a design failure state, then we can't design that protocol. There, that's my soapbox, okay? So Rob said, looking at the traffic surge all over the globe, DC and ISP should speak seamlessly from the user perspective. BGP as a protocol is 360-degree solution. I like that point of view, Sarab. That's great. Follow on to that, even as Sarab said, even I have worked on a DC design, BGP has been used as an underlay and overlay solution. I don't know if I've actually seen BGP used as an underlay and an overlay solution. Well, yeah, I have VXLAN and EVPN. Yeah, that's great. We're going to move on to the next slide.
This is we can go to the next slide, because we are a bit behind schedule, but
we got 20 minutes left, guys, so we got a lot to cover still. So we're going to try to speed up a little bit, I think. So this next one's segment routing.
And I believe so the comment from Sorab actually is really helping here. So as we mentioned, in order to try to get the maximum out of the network, we believe that KISS concept, keep it simple, stupid. So actually, when you're building simplicity, and I believe there was a saying I really like, that simplicity is more important than the more important cornerstone into digital transformation. So if you want to transform your company, your architecture to the future, you don't need, I believe, 15 years ago, 20 years, when we start working as an engineer, we always think that if I build a complex solution, this means I am a better engineer. I know how to make it complex. I know how to play with VRF leakings and play with route target and make it very complex. Nobody else can understand it. But now this mindset is changing. You need to keep it simple, as we just mentioned. Instead of having all these protocols, all this layer, we can have a simple BGP protocol running as an overlay and underlay. Similarly, if we go to this segment routing idea, it's all about simplicity. Why to have a dedicated protocol just for label distribution, which is LDP, and another protocol to build traffic engineering, which these two, which is RSVP, and we know how RSVP is very complex and very consuming to the resources. So as a way of simplicity, start thinking about segment routing. Let's bring these capabilities and embed it into one of the most strongest protocol we have, into IGP, OSPF, and ISIS. And also, in case if you want to use BGP into your data center, you can still use BGP SID or BGP segment routing IDs, specific, and so on. So I believe to carry on with simplicity, with to make your solution more controlled, you can, even if you are a big service provider and you want to have end-to-end single protocol to establish your path, you can have segment routing in the data center, segment routing in the transport, and segment routing in the access, instead of having, as example, TDM and LDP and VLANs. So can you imagine the complexity we used to have 15 years ago or so when we tried to do the stitching between the radio and the transport and the data center where the mobile core is hosted. I don't want to, as I mentioned, we're trying to give you the hints and give you the mindset of a designer. We cannot explain segment routing in 5-10 minutes. But if you have a question, please let me know. And then Zig, also, if you want to comment about segment routing. I'm a big fan of segment routing as well. But what do you think?
Yeah, so we'll see if any questions come in, right? I'll quickly comment on the comments. So Shinar said I couldn't agree more with Sarav. Not generalizing here, but BGP is the way to go. I think so as well. I will say, everyone's been throwing another address family into BGP, so BGP has become like that Swiss Army knife, right? It's a solution or technology that can solve so many different things. Then Sarab said, this is the future. Go through some scalar design, much simpler, and it's much simpler, so it's scalable, right? And I like that too. That is great, right? And Mohamed said, keep it simple, stupid, right? KISS. We have to always remember what we do, because we're the ones that are going to be called when there's an outage, right? We're going to be the ones that are called at midnight or 2 a.m. on a holiday or a weekend, and we're going to have to know what we did a year ago and why we did it, right? So I harp on that when I talk about my Cisco Live presentation every year. It's the same thing, right? We just have to keep it simple so that we understand why we did what we did months and months ago. The next one was ITAC. I hope I didn't butcher your name right. Simplicity always prevails, as Clarence said. So yeah, simplicity, right? We have to keep it simple. I am a big fan of that. There's no reason to make a complex design or solution that doesn't drive the business, right? Obviously, a business requirement is going to drive that complexity up. And if there's not a business requirement, then there's no reason to make it complex, right? Segment routing. So on the segment routing bandwagon here, I'm a big fan of segment routing. I think it has a lot of uses. I don't think it's used enough these days. Segment routing, that's a lot that goes into segment routing. So we're not going to talk about everything within segment routing. I'm going to talk about high level, what I like about segment routing, right? So if you don't know, you can actually use segment routing with a software controller of some sort and actually leverage dynamic creations of paths through your environment. So think of your TE tunnels, think of application-aware routing. You can do that within segment routing today with controllers. And that's a simple statement to make. It may not be as simple to implement, but the return on that implementation is twofold, and it's huge from a business perspective, right? That unified MPLS/segment routing configuration, you can really do application-aware routing, source-specific routing if you need to. It's really a great solution if you are in the need of that type of solution.
100%. Yeah, you remind me also, Zig, when I'm working as an architect and trying to sell the idea of segment routing, I always mention that segment routing is like SDN enabler or programmability enabler. So if you can imagine that your application can start, your application example, whatever application can start talking with your one SDN controller and tell them their requirement. And the SDN controller, because the network now is programmable and he understands for each path, he has a specific SID path, he has a binding, he can build whatever SRTE. So based on each application requirement, this is the dream. We can push the traffic to our specific source, specific path, or we can mention some specific requirement. I only want to pass through, as example, this state. If I'm living in Australia, I want my traffic only to be inside Sydney or New South Wales. I want my traffic only to pass these links where we have 100 gigs of links and whatever. So this is the beauty. So this is the future. application can start talking to not directly to the network, but through a controller, and they can start building their own passes based on their requirements. So who else can do that? I believe it would be complex if you try to do it with other RSVP, TE, and routing protocol for sure.
Yeah, so like the Mohammed's what he just said, right? So I want to make it kind of clear. You can have an application in your data center explain or tell segment routing how it needs to route, right? You can't do that with anything else. Everything else has to be done by a controller, but you can actually have your applications on your servers kind of work with segment routing, and then it can route it a certain way, which is extremely beneficial, right? Because you can instantiate that at the edge.
Yeah, 100%.
Anyone running segment routing today? Just curious. If you are, just send us a note in chat. We'll move on to the next slide. If there are any questions on segment routing, obviously just let us know. We got about 15 minutes left, and we have 4 more to go through. Right? So, all right. So some of these are going to be fairly quick and easy. So this is really just software-defined data center, and we're being vendor agnostic, right? So we're not saying vendor-specific solutions here, but we can as an example. So this would be like VMware's NSX, or it would be like Cisco's ACI, right? And there's other flavors of software-defined data center out there. There's open standards. We're going to talk about Open Daylight in a little bit. If you're not familiar with ODL, Open Daylight, we'll talk about that in a little bit too, as an open standard software-defined data center solution. So at a high level, what I would say is a software-defined data center solution provides capabilities to a business, right? It provides inherent capabilities to that business. And think of this as not only just the Vxlan configuration we talked about earlier, or the Vxlan controller implementing Vxlan on the fly, but now we have a software-defined data center that can implement application, that quality of experience information that we talked about. So let's say you have a 3-tier app, a web tier, a application tier, and a database tier. Now that's a simple tier. There's a whole bunch of other application architectures that we could talk about, but just being very, very simple. So you have your web tier, your application tier, and your database tier. Inside this controller, you can template out what that looks like, right? So now it's not a matter of just automating Vxlan. That's happening, right? Under the hood. You're doing that already in the controller.
Yeah.
But now you're adding an application layer to that controller of, okay, what level of quality of service does this application need? What level of access does this application need? Does the web tier need to talk to the application tier? Yes, it does. Does the web tier need to talk to the database tier? No, it doesn't. Like all those things are going to get pushed into the controller and pushed down. Mohamed, anything else to add to that?
I just was thinking again that now we reach that, like we are trying to combine multiple of these new trends and come up with like a framework. So we are taking the Clos, the spine and leaf, hand in hand with the Vxlan, hand in hand with controller, and we come with this SDDC. Another point I like about Cisco terminology is application centric. So we are building our data center based on the application requirement. And I like also the concept we used like a contract between, as example, the application EPG and the web EPG is like a contract, like you are dealing with two parties, two human, and you write the SLA or contract, what I need to consume from your group and what you need to consume from my side. So actually it's becoming more humanized. And then you can, based on that, the controller can instantiate the required VLANs, VXLAN, the required router if needed. I can put like attach some firewall to my VM to control the east-west traffic. A lot of things we can do with this SDC. And I believe ACI and NSX is improving day by day, adding new third parties. So even I still remember with Cisco and VMware, you can still have like Palo Alto, firewall, F5, load balancer, and whatever. So it's actually becoming advanced day and day. Just because to be aware of time, for the previous one, I think we touched the business benefit quickly, like simplicity, like operation excellence, and so on, which I believe also applies here to SD data center. If you need to add Zig, what other benefits from business perspective the company will gain by adopting SD data center? And also our colleagues here and friends can add to the chat.
Yeah, so I think you kind of summarized it pretty well, right? I think it's the
Yeah.
same as what we talked about
Yeah.
before. You might get some additional controls and policies of your applications, right? That you don't necessarily have in these other solutions that we talked about. We're building on each other, right? As we go through today, we're building on the technologies that we're talking about. So
100%.
if anyone else has some specific use cases they want to talk about here, let us know in chat. We're going to keep moving along here. You ready, Mohamed, for this next one?
Yeah. Let's go on.
BGPLS. It's all you, my friend. It's all you.
Yeah. So BGPLS is like something working behind the hood. It's not something that your application team will see or your business team will be aware of. It's like unknown soldier. So it will become for specific use cases. Let's say for any reason, whatever reason, if you are merging multiple companies or if you are working on segmentation and you want to give, let's consider this is your big data center and you have your exist in multiple continents. Let's say here in Asia Pac, like in Australia, in Europe, and in US, in New York, Zig, and you have 3 different IGP domains. Let's make it simple. Let's say ISIS, but different ISIS domain. And in order to do that, you will not be able to build an end-to-end path meeting your requirement easily when you have inter-domain. So that's why people start thinking, why not to take all this link state database about specific domain, all the information about the links, all the information about the device, and send it by a very nice protocol who can carry whatever we want. So they start thinking, what protocol should we use? So they thought initially about PCE, Path Competition Engine PCP protocol, and then they said, why not to use our old friend BGP? We can carry whatever we need over BGP. We can carry MAC, we can carry access list. So in this case, BGP will start carrying this label link state database from different domains and give it back to our WAN SDN controller. By doing this, the WAN SDN controller will have a full picture of the whole 3 domains and can again help us to establish the path from, as example, from point A to point Z here. So again, it's a way to communicate information. It adds to visibility. It adds to our tools to be able to build the right and perfect path through our network, optimal path through our network. If you want to add something, Zig?
Yeah, I'll try to add a couple things real quick, right? So, so BGP Link States, LS is Link State, right? So we're taking all this information from our IGPs, wherever they are, and we're putting them in BGP, and then BGP is sending this information to a controller. The reason why we would do this is because we want to make some sort of decision based on this information. We want to make some sort of business intent or decision or application decision based on this information that we provide to the controller, right? And we're being vendor agnostic here. The WAN SDN controller, it's this box, right? We're going to show Open Daylight in a minute. So if you're not familiar with that, we'll give you a quick rundown on Open Daylight, but that's actually a perfect use case here. You can do an Open Daylight deployment, and it'll pull in this link state information, and then you can leverage Open Daylight to run your flows across it. So think of on-demand TE flows. But they're not called TE flows, but they're called paths, right? So you can create these on-demand flows based on the IGP information of all these domains together. Which, if you don't have a reason to do it, then you don't need to do it, right? But if there's a valid reason to do this, this is a lot simpler than potentially running MPLS TE or segment routing TE, right? We're talking about keeping things simple, right? We got 5 minutes roughly. That's where I'm at with that. We have one comment or question. Shinar says, does WAN SDN controller also take care of some traffic engineering in the core? Yes, it does. That's the simple answer.
Definitely, yes. This is one of the main functionality of one SDN controller. And by the way, maybe you'll not see this a lot if you're running a small data center, you will not see this complex setup with multiple domains. it's mainly, you'll see it more into service provider, or if you, as example, not providing a private cloud for your own enterprise, but maybe if you are a data centers private cloud provider, maybe in a country or so on, or working with one of the public cloud providers. Yeah.
So I'm going to move on to the next slide, but I'm going to say a couple things, right? So
Yeah.
you may not see this, Mohamed said, right? I intend to actually create a couple videos on BGPLS and Open Daylight. We'll see if we actually get around to doing it. I'm vocalizing it here, so I keep myself accountable. So Mohamed can yell at me if I don't do it in a month. But the intent here is I want to build out a lab environment that shows BGPLS. The lab environment is going to be as real world as possible. That makes sense, right? And then the intent is also to deploy Open Daylight controller on top of that, right? And show some of those workflows, right? So here's number 7, Open Daylight Controller, also called ODL. This is the architecture of the controller, of how things work, and we're not going to go into the ins and outs of how the information flows between the different elements of the Open Daylight Controller. The intent here is that this is an additional controller than like a vendor-specific controller, right? So this isn't a Cisco controller. This isn't a VMware controller. This is technically an open standard controller that you can pull down and run right now if you wanted to. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to add here?
No, I know that you are, yeah, you have tight time schedule. So yeah, it's like we mentioned in segment routing, and you can use WAN SDN controller, and in the previous slide in BGPLS. So this is one of your options. So if you don't want to be vendor locked down or use one of the existing vendor solution, you can go for this open source, Open Daylight. It supports BGPLS, it supports PCE, it can communicate with SR, with normal routing protocol. So I believe it's yeah, a good option for open source. Again, open source for big companies, maybe the challenge is, what about the support? What about if I hit a problem with ODL? Who can fix it? Shall I train my team and do it in-house, or can I try to find like what we call it a distribution, or maybe like a Red Hat or whatever for this ODL to get the support? So this is one point to consider when you start using open source applications. Last but not least.
Yeah, last but not least, right? And I have time, so I'm not tied up to the hour. I was more trying to be mindful of the people on the call. So I have a few more minutes after 8 o'clock my time in the morning here. So if there's questions or comments or people want to stay on for any reason, I have about 15 more minutes that I could stay on for, just so everyone knows. Go ahead, Mohamed.
Yeah, here just we start with a question. How you can compare why people moved from physical servers to virtual machine? So this was in historical, maybe 20 years or so. And now people moving from VMware to containers. So do you see similarity about the reason moving from sorry, I'm still a network guy, physical servers to VMware, and now moving from VMware to containers? Is there for the same reasons, or do you believe there's something else happen which start pushing people to use new technology?
So I think there are some similar reasons, right? So going physical to virtual, right? You save money, right? You save a ton of money, right? You're not buying physical devices anymore. You're buying your host, and now you have tons of VMs on that host, whatever form those VMs are. This is the same idea with containers, right? So now you can build out a VM, but then you can put a ton of containers on it, right? So that website example earlier, my website is most likely a container on a VM that has 100 websites on it, right? That's the idea of a container from a, how it would work perspective. You're going to get that OpEx and CapEx investment increase, right? You're going to get that increase on your savings and potentially increase on revenue, right? So decrease on spending, increase on revenue, right? Which is good for a business. Some additional factors, containers provide some additional security elements that VMware's the VMs just didn't, right? So now you can build out a VM, you can put containers on it, and those containers are now segmented if you want them to be segmented, right? You can keep their data isolated, but it's still on the same VM or same device. It's all containerized within that VM. I'm using the definition in the word. I'm using the word in the definition, containerized, but that's the idea. It's compartmentalized in the VM. Some additional ideas. Containers are a lot easier to spin up, right? You can spin them up on the fly really quick. We're at 8 o'clock, so those are some quick benefits. Anyone else have anything else they would like to add to the benefits?
Yeah, yeah. Also, while waiting for our friends here to add, so as you can see here, the drawing that with VM you are losing a lot of resources for the guest OS. So we have the hypervisor and we have the main operating system for the host itself. But for each VM, we have this guest OS, we have the library, and then we have the application, and we need to take care of the OS, batch it, upgrade it, whatever. So, and the container simplify this. So instead of you have a server, instead of having only 6 VM on this physical server, you can increase your utilization and use 20s or 10s of containers on the same physical device. And I believe that it's coming like a mental, again, mindset shift. So instead of treating your VM like a pet, where you need to take care of your pet, feed it every day, make sure it's clean, and like Zig, cat and dog, and he has to attend with us the seminars and feel happy. So you're actually trying to take your application and infrastructure as a herd. So you don't really care about the Docker, if sorry, about the container. If one died, you can just, if one is not feeling well, you can just leave it to die and instantiate a new container. One of the things which I really was surprised when I heard it a couple of years ago, that even Google, when start talking about Kubernetes and containers, they said that for each of your search requests, they instantiate a new container just to respond to this search request. Can you imagine how fast is it to work with containers? So for each search request, which are billions over the years, they are using this with containers. And just to highlight another point, then we can have Docker, like your ASXI, to manage the host. And if you have a cluster, you can start having your Kubernetes as a control plane to who understand each data center capabilities and start dividing and hosting the application and the container based on the specific requirement and the health of each data center. And as I mentioned, when we started, if, as example, this pod failed, he can, in few milliseconds, can start a similar container in another data center and so on. So it's actually trying to achieve the self-healing promise or dream.
No, that's great. I'll add one last comment here on like the control plane aspect of these containerization solutions, like Kubernetes, OpenStack. There's a number of solutions out there, right? A lot of these solutions actually manage all of the infrastructure components, right? So they have plugins to manage storage. They have plugins to manage network. They have plugins to manage OS. Whatever OS is running, hypervisor, etc. So if you're not familiar, you haven't played around with Kubernetes or OpenStack or any of those other technologies, a lot of them have those plugins. They can be a little complex to run, like OpenStack can be a little complex, but you get a lot of return on that complexity from the value here, just so you know.
100%, yeah. Yeah.
So we're over on time. We got still people on the call. So, I'd like to open it up to any more questions you guys might have. We're at the thank you page here, and I'll go to that next page here so we can see it. I'm going to stop using MS. Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you want to talk about? We're still here, so we can talk about anything that you have on your mind. That's what we're here for. And then while you guys are writing down your questions in chat, I'm assuming that's what you're doing right now. Any feedback, right? Did you guys like this session? Was it good? Did you hate this session, right? If you hated it, let us know. Hopefully you didn't hate it. Hopefully you did like it. I would add, if you liked it, tell us what you liked about it, right? Like what did you take away from the session, right?
Yeah, and usually, even in my trainings and my sessions, I ask people, what are the areas of improvement? So I've been working with Zig for the last 3 sessions, and also have a couple of series about cloud 5G, which was also very successful. So how can we improve this session more? And what you want to hear in the future for the upcoming session? So if you can write this or even unmute yourself and tell us how to improve it even better.
Yeah, we're getting some great comments. So I'll just try to read them off while we're doing this. We have a question, so maybe you can answer this question. Alu said, is there any SDN commercial solution using segment routing today? And I'll just go through here. So Shinar says, thanks, Mohamed and Zig. Great refresher. Jawad says, thank you guys for putting this together. This was very beneficial overview and business drivers for these technologies. Merrick says, great session. Thanks to both of you. Sita says, thank you for the informative session. Good overview. Mohamed says, very informative. Thank you both. And Islam says, thanks, team. Actually, if it was boring, we wouldn't spend 1.5 hours. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so I was being a little sarcastic, I guess, with that statement, right? If you guys are still on, then you guys are enjoying it, right? So thanks for that. And then Sarab said, thank you, Zig and Mohamed. This is a very good session.
Yeah, thank you, Zig, again. There was one question from Alu, if I understand your question correctly, about segment routing and SDN. Here I have to be vendor specific. So yeah, Cisco, they have some solution that as an SDN communicating with SR, especially for service provider, you know, they have NSO way, and now they combine it under the umbrella of Crosswalk. So Crosswalk is like the SDN controller for using the segment routing to establish the path end to end, and they also use telemetry to complete this closed loop with the real-time visibility from the network. So yeah, there are some vendor. I believe also Juniper, they have Contrail and North Star, but at the beginning, Juniper was not a big supporter of segment routing for the previous 5 years, but now they are back on it because they are more into SRv6. They don't want to go directly with SR MPLS. They believe we should jump directly to SRv6. So this is Zig. Do you have other use cases or?
So you have some good. The Cisco use case was pretty good, right? That was something that they've been working on for a while, and they added pretty recently and public announced it to the public. I believe I'm going to be talking out of turn here, so I think ACI might in the future. If it hasn't already, the new version of ACI is going to have some additional features to integrate with segment routing. But I have no knowledge of that. I'm assuming, right? So I'll make that very clear. I have no prior knowledge of that. I'm thinking that's where it's going. So that's just a viewpoint, a personal opinion.
100%. So
Yeah,
does this answer your question? Yeah, I was going to sorry to interrupt Zig. I was going to ask Alu if this answered his question.
Yeah, we'll see if he responds back on that. We also got another question from Sita saying, would you suggest any further reading materials?
Wow, it's a big list of technologies. So each one of them, maybe you need to read one or couple of books. So there is a very nice book about policy-driven ACI, segment routing. There are the 2 books written by Clarence Philfis about SR and SR traffic engineering. Open Daylight, you can study open network framework, and you have certificates. What else? A lot. Docker and Kubernetes.
There's a whole bunch. Okay, so I would recommend a couple things. So I mean, I hate to plug myself, Mohamed, man. I hate to do it, right? But I feel like this is one of the best resources you can go to. Cisco Live, right? Cisco Live has a bunch of content every year that talks about a number of these technologies: Vxlan, segment routing. We talked about a lot of things today: spline leaf architectures, etc. I do a network design focused session list for Cisco Live. So, right now Cisco Live is going through a digital rotation of sessions getting published because of all the things happening in the world with COVID-19. So June was the first publication. About 200 sessions went live in June. July this month, a couple weeks ago, about 250 sessions went live. And then the third release is going to be in September. I don't know the number of sessions that are going to go live in September. But I have done a kind of correlated list of the network design sessions that you should focus on. So I've gone through all the sessions I've posted so far, and I've highlighted the ones that you should follow. So if you go to that link, I can send it to you if you want. I actually have a Vxlan session that you should follow, a segment routing session that you should follow. And again, this isn't my content, right? I just did the blog post and the YouTube video. This is Cisco Live content that you should consume, and it's free, right? It's all free to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Zig. And please make sure to watch this Cisco Lives. I believe it will be perfect. And read these books. Maybe we'll try to prepare a list and share it with you so we got your emails. I believe there was another question from Shinar about if segment routing support all feature available by RSVP-TE. It depends on vendor, Shinar. Some of them, when we started, source routing was there from day one. Some of the constraint-based routing, was already there, but some specific bandwidth reservation was not there. And some of the vendor now is working to support this natively in SR. So not 100% so far. The protection is there, source routing is there. Some of the business, the bandwidth reservation. Sorry, it's almost reaching 11 p.m. here in Sydney, so I'll start losing my words. Yeah. The second question to you, Zig, cloud native data from Dinesh. Oh yeah, yes. This is a really good resource, cloud native data center networking. Yeah.
Yes, I think it is. It's a good resource. I think
Exactly.
that's a statement, though, right? I think he's just stating. I think it's a good resource, but I could be wrong.
Great.
And then Sita said, please share the list. I just put it in chat real quick, and I'll say it out loud real quick. So the first blog post I did, again, I'm not trying to harp on my stuff. I just a correlated list, right? It's zigbits.tech/51. If you go to that link, it'll go to the first listing, and I'm working on the second listing for July. So if there's something that you're looking to see, just reach out to us. We'll let you know on what you can leverage. Trying to create a listing of content for you to review, right? All right. Hey, I want to say thank you all so much. And this was extremely interactive, and that's what I like. I personally love it to be interactive. I think Mohamed does too. I'm talking for you, man. I'm sorry. We had so many questions, and I think we've answered every question today. We've gone over. If anyone needs anything else, you know how to reach out to us. We're on socials, right? We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, etc. Feel free to reach out to either of us anytime.
Great. Thank you again, Zig, and I totally agree with you. It was one of the best sessions we had mainly because of you. You make it very interactive, your comments, your questions, your notes. Thanks again. And as mentioned, please follow us. And if you really enjoyed this session, subscribe to our YouTube channel, spread the knowledge, and let us know what do you want to hear on the next session, which I believe most probably it will be between data center and public cloud. But if you have specific topic, please share it with us. Thanks again, and
Thanks, guys.
have a good day and weekend.
See you guys. Have a good one.
Bye.